everyone. Welcome to our first in a series of 3 Lunch and Learns. It's very, very nice to see everyone. It's really nice to see your faces and faces that I haven't seen. Joel, nice to see you. Vered, hi. I saw Sheila, Ima, hello. Linda, Neil, I see probably more than either of us would like to see the other one on lots of meetings. And welcome to the others who are on here and I don't see your faces. So we're doing 3 weeks now, this Lunch and Learn series. No problem, Lauren, welcome on. 3 weeks of this Lunch and Learn series on food preparation on Shabbat. We called it food preparation on Shabbat. We're going to call it cooking on Shabbat or Shabbat and cooking, but then someone said, well, you can't cook on Shabbat. So that would be a really short series. And also people thought that maybe it'll be, people confuse it with some of the cooking classes that we're doing, around Shabbat. And this is not a cooking class. I'm not giving you any tips about cooking. Now, there's obviously a lot to cover about food preparation on Shabbat. And we're certainly, I could tell you from the outset, not going to cover everything. But I hope that we'll cover some. And if we feel that we need to keep going and have some more classes, we can certainly do that. And I hope this will be helpful and instructive to people. What I really want to do, particularly today, is give a little bit of a background and make some connections for us. I think that we know certain things that we do or don't do regarding like heating food up or placing food before Shabbat. But I think there's a big divide or separation between what we know that we do or don't do and where these things come from. And so I want to give us a sense of where they come from, so we'll then understand why we're doing what we're doing. So as we go along, feel free to ask questions. If you have something like a big question relating to these issues that we don't discuss today and you want to see us discuss it next time, we can certainly do that. I'm going to share my screen now. And this source sheet that I'll be sharing, I can also send to anyone who would like it. So here we go. Let's get started. So first of all, my thanks to Rabbi David Fried, who's a colleague of mine, a friend, and I'd asked if anyone had some good collections of sources around this, and he had some really, really good collections. So a lot of these sources were really put together by him, and then I picked out what to use or not to use. We're going to start just looking at what cooking, what we mean by when we say cooking for Shabbat. Like, what does that mean? What does it mean to cook, right? Like, is toasting something cooking, right? Like, what do we mean by cooking, okay? So we have here, we have in the Hebrew and in the English, this comes from the Rambam, who describes the following. He says, whether a person is baking, or a person is boiling, like what we would say cooking. Or if someone is cooking dyes. Okay, so interesting, like doesn't necessarily have to be food. Or even boiling water. These are all the same thing, meaning these are all forms of cooking. And you could, this isn't obvious, right? Maybe cooking is only cooking and not baking. Or maybe cooking is only baking, not cooking. Maybe heating up water. Why would heating up water be different than other things? Why does he have to point out water? Why is heating up water maybe different? Anyone? Heating up water doesn't really cook anything, right? I mean, it doesn't change it. It's just hot water, then it's cold water, then it's hot water again, then it's cold water, right? It doesn't really change. It's not like you made the food into a soup, right? You just heated up the water, it's hot, then it's cold, right? So, but no, that is considered cooking as well. All of these things are considered to be cooking, okay? So these are all things that are forbidden to do on Shabbat. Now, what's very interesting and we have to know is the following, number 2, here, where it says halacha 3, halacha gimel. Someone who's cooking on, by the way, it's ur, which means fire, not or, which means light. So ur means fire. Someone who's cooking over fire, davar shaya mevushal kol tzarko, something that had already been fully cooked, or something that doesn't need to be cooked at all, patur is exempt. Now you have to know 2 things here. Okay, so first of all, when the Rambam says is exempt, it doesn't mean that you're allowed to do this. it means that you're not doing something that is biblically prohibited. Okay? So the main point here is that we see that there is a distinction between when something is already cooked, right? So let's say you took or baked, let's say you took like a challah and you like baked the challah more. It was already a baked challah, you baked it more. That is not of the same level as baking in the first place. Okay, these are principles that are important to know. Okay, I'm just stopping here for a moment. Any questions? Anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, let me just check the chat. Yeah, you create steam. That's true, but that's true, Marion. Thank you. You do create steam when you heat the water, and certain elements of it may change. But the main thing would be, this would be how we would tell the difference. The main thing would be if you saw a cup of water sitting on the table and it had been previously boiled but was completely cooled off now, someone wouldn't. That's a cup of hot water that cooled off, right? They would just say that's a cup of water, right? As opposed to, let's say somebody made a soup and then the soup cooled off, you would say that's cold soup. You wouldn't say that's cold water with vegetables floating in it, right? You understand that it is now something new. Reheating something that's already cooked. We're going to get to that much later on, okay? All right, so let's get back to this source sheet. Okay. Number 2, and this is that was just in general about cooking. It's not going to have that many practical ramifications. But it's going to have many very practical ramifications. This is very, very important. A critical Mishnah when it comes to heating foods on Shabbat is number 2. Okay, so here we go. Kira shehisikua bekash uvigvava. If one had a stove that was lit with straw, notnim aleha tafshil. If it was lit with straw, right, like these were the kinds of stoves they had, or we're going to translate this to modern time, one may place a pot of food on it before Shabbat. Begefet uveitzim, however, if it was lit with peat or wood, a hotter stove, lo yitain ad sheyigrof. You can't put any food on that until yigrof. This is a term that's going to come up many times. Yigrof means to rake. We're talking about raking out the coals. O achitain etafar, or etaifer, or if you put like dust or dirt on top to stop the fire. I'm going to explain this in just a moment. Beit Shammai says the following: Notlim avalo machzirim. Beit Shammai says an oven like this, you can take something off of it on Shabbat, but you can't return something to a Shabbat. Beit Hillel and Beit Hillel says af machzirim, you even can return. Okay, now this is all very, very important. It's going to be very important. Let's break this down a little bit. So you have a stove. You can't put any food on it. If it's a stove of wood, let's say, you can't place any food on it. If it was a stove that was made that was from peat or wood, right, a stove like this. So now you have to do something particular. What do you have to do? Lo yitin ad sheyigrof. You have to do this, what we call yigrof. What is yigrof? So it means to get rid of the coals there. But let's look in Rashi, which is right below that. Why do you have to do this? Why do coals have to be raked away? Shema echateh begechalim, lest one comes to adjust the coals. This is actually very, very important. Okay. Why is that important? So you could say, if something's already cooked, I should be able to leave it on the stove. There shouldn't be any problem. Like, for example, let's say you prepared like soup and you have a pot of soup. Can you put that soup on a fire and leave it on the fire right before Shabbat and just leave it on the fire, right? And then take it. I mean, you wouldn't do that because you probably want to cover up the fire. But can you do that? There's a concern that you're going to stoke the coals. That translates for us today to changing the knob on the stove, to adjusting the heat. And that's what we're concerned about. Okay? That's number 1. 1 sec. Secondly, Beit Shammai says you can take off, but you can't put back. And why can't you put back? So here's what Rashi says. Demirsi kimivashel. It looks like you're cooking. It looks like you're cooking by putting something back on the stove. So what we're talking about here are the general principles that are very important, okay? And I have it on the sheet here. First of all, there's this principle of mirsi kibishul, something that looks like cooking. There are going to be things that we are not allowed to do because they look like we're cooking, even if we're not cooking. Okay? With me? An example of this would be putting food into the oven. So I think that we know, most of us probably know that if we have a dry food, let's say a challah, for example, and it's already baked, you're allowed to heat the challah up on Shabbos. But you can't heat the challah up by putting it into the oven. You can't do that. Even if it's a Shabbos mode oven, you can't do that. The reason you can't do that is because if somebody sees you putting food into the oven, it looks like you're cooking. Similarly, using a fire on the stove. You can't put some on a stovetop. You can't put something onto the fire. Why can't you put something onto the fire? Because it looks like you're cooking. Even if you had a boiling hot pot of soup that was boiling hot, you couldn't put it onto the fire because that looks like you're cooking this soup. That's where we get to blachs and all. We'll get to that later on. Okay, so that's number one. Mirsi kibishul. And when something looks like cooking, see, when you have a blach on, it doesn't look like you're cooking. Nobody cooks by having a sheet of metal and cook on top of that sheet of metal, or for that matter, a hot plate. Nobody cooks that way, right? You don't cook like that. So that's one issue that we have to be aware of. Shema yachateh is another, less concern that one may stoke the coals. Stoking the coals, adjusting the flame, these are actual concerns of cooking. If you have a pot of soup on the fire and you adjust the fire to turn it up, you are actively cooking that soup, right? So sometimes we're going to not allow something because it looks like cooking. Sometimes we're not going to allow something because it actually is cooking, or we're concerned you may come to actually cook. And the other key principle here that we have to be aware of that we saw in these sources is this concept of mevushal versus not mevushal, something that's cooked versus something that's not cooked. Something that's already cooked is going to have very different rules than something that is not yet cooked, okay? So let me stop here, and I'm going to show you how these principles play out in just a moment, okay? I want to stop here for a moment. This part that I'm sharing all now is sort of a little bit more academic, right? I want us to get the principles to understand that, if you're thinking in your head, you're like applying this to many cases. We're going to look at some of those cases, and you can ask about the cases. But the main thing I want us to see is that these come from somewhere. Like a blech didn't come out of, I don't know, someone in a Jewish store that said, hey, this would be a great idea. Let's have this thing, right? Like there's a reason for it. There's a reason that we need that, right? Any questions on what we did so far? Sort of like clarification questions? Okay, so let's move on now. Okay, so here's where we'll see these principles played out. These principles that we just mentioned, that something can't look like cooking, this idea of stoking the coals, lest some come to stoke the coals, and the fact that it's cooked or not cooked, okay? Here's where we can sort of see these things played out. And note, by the way, notice, so the sources I brought before, it was the Rambam and it was the Gemara. And now we're going to the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is the codes of Jewish law that gives us the practical halacha, okay? So here's what he says here. This is called shehiyah, leaving food on the stove before Shabbat. Leaving food on the stove before Shabbat. That's what we're talking about now. We will talk about Shabbos morning, you take food out of the fridge, what can you do with it? Okay, we will talk about that. Let me just check the chat. Are these principles all derived from the Mishnah originally? Yeah, everything that we talked about so far is derived from the Mishnah, yes. One person asked that question. Where do crock pots come in? Shalom cooking overnight. Is that okay? You start cooking it. We're going to get to that. Okay. Yeah, we'll get to crock pots. And if I don't specifically mention crock pots, then you could bring it up. Okay. All right. So right now we are talking about before Shabbat, putting food on the stove, or for that matter, by the way, putting food in the crock pot or putting it down. We're not talking right now about taking food from the fridge and putting it on. We're talking about before Shabbat, what can you do? What can you set up? And again, I just want to be clear. The reason that this is important is you might think you can, of course, you can put anything on the stove before Shabbat. Like before Shabbat, you can do whatever you want, right? So like you can do it. So, but there are concerns. If you put a pot directly on the fire before Shabbat and Shabbat starts, we're concerned that you may come to adjust the flame, or we're concerned that it looks like you're cooking, right? So there are concerns. It's not just because it's before Shabbat. You hear what I'm saying? Meaning I could see someone arguing and saying, before Shabbat, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want before Shabbat, right? Like Shabbat didn't start yet, just like whatever. I mean, you can set a timer or whatever. So there are things that can't be done because it's then going to look problematic, or because we're actually concerned that you may adjust. That's why we're discussing this, okay? Okay. So, by the way, if you have a question, you can feel free to call out. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat, but I'm also sharing the screen, so I might not see the question in the chat right away. So, Kira, so let's say you have a stove. If it was lit with peat, which is what have in English there? The peat's like made out of like leftover, like you used to use like leftover like olives or wood or whatever. So asur litain aleha tavshil mibeod yom lashoto aleha elim kin bashel kol tzorko mitztamek veralo delek lamecha shemeyechata. So you're following. If you have a stove which is lit by peat, it's prohibited to leave a pot of food on it from before Shabbat unless it is fully cooked to the point that any additional heat would make it worse, because then there's no worry that someone would try to adjust the coals. So you want to put a pot of something on the stove before Shabbat. Can you do that? So first of all, you can't do it unless it's already fully cooked. You can't do it unless it's already fully cooked, right? Why? Because of this concern of you might come to adjust the flame. If you have a half-cooked, and we're going to see that there's more categories here, but for our purposes right now, let's say you have a half-cooked pot, and you leave it on, and it's half cooked, you might say, oh, we're eating in an hour. Time to turn up the flame. Time to turn the fire up. We need to get this cooked quicker. And we don't want a person to do that. Okay? Clear? However, there's another case where you are allowed to leave a pot on the fire, and even if it's not fully cooked, and that is the next case. Oh, shahayachai, or it was living. What does it mean? Living doesn't mean living. It was raw. Completely raw. Shalom bashal klal. It's completely raw. The kevan shuchai, since it is raw, you're not going to think about it till tomorrow. Meaning, if you put like take right before Shabbat starts, you take raw potatoes and raw meat and put them in a pot with water. We are not concerned that you're going to adjust the flame. Why aren't we concerned you're going to adjust the flame? Because no adjusting the flame is going to help that food be ready for tonight. No adjusting that flame is going to help that food be ready for tonight. That food's not going to be ready for tonight. It might be ready for tomorrow. But for it to be ready for tomorrow, you're not going to adjust the flame. You're going to leave it alone. Okay? So it's actually very interesting. To put a pot on the stove before Shabbat, you either want it to be completely cooked or completely raw. One or the other. And this applies to crock pots also. You either want it to be completely cooked or completely raw. If it's completely raw, then we're not worried that you're going to adjust it and turn it up, because you're not eating this for another 12 hours or, whatever, more than that, probably 14, 15 hours. If it's completely cooked, then all you're doing is keeping it warm. We're also not concerned that you're going to adjust the flame. Okay? Either of these cases is fine. There's another case, and that's what he's going to talk about right here. In terms of how okay, here we go. Aval, however, init bashal kitzat. Let's say it's cooked a little bit, but it's not fully cooked. But it's not fully cooked. Or even if it's cooked, but more cooking is going to make it better, then we're concerned that you may come to stoke the coals. So we don't allow one to leave a pot on the stove in that case, unless, and this is underlined for you, the coals were raked or covered in a layer of ash. Meaning, if you have food that's cooked, but more cooking is going to make it better, or it's partially cooked, but it needs to be cooked more, a circumstance where we are concerned you may adjust the flame, that's where what we are calling here coals being raked, as we're going to see soon, that's what we call a blech, or a hot plate, or a crock pot. Okay. Now, by the way, it gives a very interesting practical tip here. Let's say, I don't know, let's say you didn't time it right and you started cooking the food and you thought it was going to be cooked, but it wasn't quite cooked or whatever the case. And we're going to see that there's another level of cooking here. So he says, you know what you could do is you could put in some raw meat. If you put some raw meat in the pot right before Shabbat, it will be permitted, just like the whole pot is completely raw, because it's not going to be ready till the next morning anyways, which is actually very interesting, like a pretty neat idea. Put another piece of meat in there that's completely raw. It's going to take time for that meat to cook, and we're not concerned that you're going to adjust the flame. Okay. Now, one more thing that we need to know, and then I'm going to stop for questions, and we're going to see how this plays out practically. When we talk about something being cooked, what level of cooking does it have to be? So there's another distinction here. And again, listen, it's okay if you're not getting all of this down. It's fine. I just want us to be aware that like these discussions happen, okay? There's something that's called Ma'achal Ben Drusai. Ma'achal Ben Drusai, the Ben Drusai were people who were bandits, and their lifestyle was to always be on the run. So they didn't eat food fully cooked. They ate food about a third or maybe a half cooked. They were called the Ben Drusai. So we say that b'diavad, meaning worst case scenario, it's acceptable if the food is either a third or a half cooked before Shabbat. We can consider that to be cooked. And that's actually very, very important, because if you think about that, you can't, right? Like, let's say you started cooking food before Shabbat. It's not completely raw. You'd have to make sure that it was a third or a half cooked minimally before Shabbat starts. I have on here that their opinions that it's better to be stringent around this. Okay. So let me stop for a second. Questions, comments at this moment? Yeah, Linda.
So I understand what you're saying about changing the temperature while you don't keep a pot on the stove. But what happens, and if you don't have a blech, what happens if you just turn the burner off?
If the fire's off, you can keep something on top of the stove. It's not a concern. If the fire's off, it's not. If the fire is off, it's not a stove, right? There's no, or it's under the category that we saw before of a stove where they basically took everything away, right? They took the straw away. It's not hot anymore. That's not a problem. It's not a problem.
If you add the extra piece of meat, then you have to leave the whole thing on there until Shabbat is over.
What do you mean by that? What's the situation?
I'm assuming you're adding, the situation is that, so you're eating dinner a little bit late, you're starting your Shabbat meal a little bit later, and you throw in the raw meat because it still needs time to cook after Shabbat starts.
You're saying you're
going to eat it for dinner Shabbat evening.
Why'd you throw in the extra meat? Because it wasn't, because the food wasn't cooked at all. Like if
it wasn't ready.
It wasn't ready to go. So okay, yeah. So now you put that extra piece in.
Right.
The idea of putting that extra piece in would be that this is something that's not going to be ready tonight.
But you started it too early, maybe. It's just not, it's in between.
It's in between.
So It's not a way to allow for more cooking for something you're going to eat soon.
Correct. That's correct. That's actually the whole point. The whole point is that you want to make it really clear that you're not intending to eat this anytime soon. By putting in that extra piece of meat, this is going to be ready tomorrow, right?
But a crock pot is different in because it's a different type of cooking device that you you could start your cholent earlier and still be okay if it's half cooked when Shabbat starts.
The crock pot wouldn't be different. It's just that um, the crock pot should either be raw, like starting it right before Shabbat, or start it Friday morning and it's going to be a third or a half cooked, right, by the time Shabbat starts. You also the crock pot shouldn't be in that in-between area either. Most of the time, I don't think it's going to be. You know, if you put it up right before Shabbat, it's raw. It's definitely not going to be ready. Actually, I want to take back what I just said, because I think it depends really. And it depends on what kind of crock pot it is too. And if it's a crock pot that there's no concern that you're going to adjust there's no way to get it ready tonight, then you'd be okay anyways. Yeah, then you would be okay anyways. So I guess you really could put some, like let's say you started the cooking 5 hours ago, but there's just no way this thing needs to cook overnight. You should be okay regardless. Yeah.
Even if it's not completely raw.
Even if it's not completely raw, because there's no concern of you adjusting it, because there's no way to speed up the cooking. Yeah, that should be okay. Yeah, Vered.
Can you repeat that last thing you said about whether if it's a half or a third of the way cooked, then you can or cannot leave it on?
If it's a half or a third of the way cooked, it's considered, though in your mind, half or third cooked equals cooked. That's
okay.
Right, half or third cooked equals cooked, because there were people who ate food that way. It basically it's sort of a way of saying it's cooked enough.
So we would not be able to. You would put it on a blech as opposed to continue cooking it on the stove.
Yeah, so we're really everything that we're gonna get to everything that we're talking about. You're gonna put on a blech, meaning because first of all, practically speaking, no one's leaving their oven. You're not gonna leave your stovetop fire on over all of Shabbat without it being covered with a blech, right?
If you have a gas, yeah, you can leave your stove on with a blech on top.
No, with a blech on top. I'm saying you're not gonna leave your stovetop fire in any way, electric or gas, on and not covered in some way.
You would hope not. I mean, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like practically, You're not going to do that anyways. But leaving aside the practical of it, most cases we would allow this anyways, because you're going to run into looking like cooking concerns. So you're going to have a blech on top of that anyways. Yeah. But the thing is, even with the blech, if your food is not raw, but not at least a third or a half cooked, you can't put that on the blech and have it cooking going into Shabbat. Even with the blech, and I amended what I said to Neil, I was going to say even with the crock pot, but the truth is the crock pot works differently because we're not concerned about you affecting stoking the coals, because there's nothing you can do about it, right? Okay. So I want to show one more piece here that relates to us, and then we're going to go down below for a summary of all of this, which I think will be very helpful. So Rav Shimon Eider, who collects halachot of Shabbat, says the following: the minhag is to place a blech, a sheet of metal, over the burners that are lit to cover the flame, following the opinion of Rav Moshe Feinstein. This serves as an indication that he desires less heat, so he will not come to raise the fire, or as a visible reminder not to raise the fire. This is, for our purposes, this is the mitigating the concern of stoking the coals. There's also this idea, which says over here, preferably the knobs of the stove, the controls should be covered too, following another particular opinion, okay? Some people do this, some people aren't necessarily careful with it. Growing up at our home, this was not something that we worried about. At least I don't think so. My parents could correct me if I'm wrong. The blech is enough. I think it's enough because for both the reasons that it says. First of all, it shows that you're not doing real cooking. You want less heat. Second of all, you're not going to go up to your stove and adjust the knobs when you have a blech on there. You know there's the blech on there because it's Shabbos. You see the blech, you're not going to forget it. But there are some people who take the knobs off or who cover the knobs. There are some blechs that go over the knobs. Some cooking things that we use, like for example, a hot plate doesn't even have a knob there at all, so you don't have that concern. Okay, so let's see a summary of this, and then we'll have a little bit of time to digest. No pun intended. Everything that we just looked at. So I found a good summary on the Stark's website, and I think it will be very helpful for us. Okay, so here I'm just going to read. Many rabbinic laws were initiated to prevent us, one, from transgressing Torah's prohibitions. They're intended to distance us from what's prohibited, as well as to prevent us from performing actions which can be misconstrued with a prohibited malacha. So here, this is what we've been talking about, shehiyah. Shehiyah means placing on before Shabbat. Among these rabbinic laws is shehiyah. One is prohibited to leave food on or in the place where it will be cooking, even if it was placed there before Shabbat. There's concern that leaving the food that is not ready to be eaten on the cooking surface or in an oven may lead one to add heat on Shabbos. The rabbis were concerned that one may adjust the heat to enhance the food. In the past, when cooking was done directly over burning logs, there was a concern that someone might stir the embers, which would add oxygen and generate heat. By stirring the embers, one transgresses two Torah prohibitions, burning a fire on Shabbos and cooking, which is actually interesting, right? It is two prohibitions. You can't burn a fire on Shabbos. You also can't cook on Shabbos. It'll be both, okay? Presumably, by adjusting the knob on a stove, you'd be doing both also. In order to prevent any wrongdoing, the rabbis agreed that unless the food is edible before Shabbos, one may not leave it on or in the oven when Shabbos begins, unless the embers are removed or covered to prevent someone from stirring them. In lieu of covering the coals, we have the custom of placing a blech over the flames before Shabbos. It should be noted that the main function of a blech is to make sure that one does not adjust the fire. Therefore, with a modern oven or cooktop, one should cover the temperature controls in addition to covering the flame of the blech. Over here, they say that specifically about covering the temperature controls, like we saw up above. Not everyone completely agrees with that. Okay, so let me stop here and stop for questions or comments. The Shabbat mode of oven doesn't allow you to adjust the temperature. So we're going to look at the whole Shabbos mode oven thing. I actually found interesting on the Stark K, they have 10 myths of the Shabbos mode on ovens. I couldn't decide if I should bring this up now or bring it up later on, but the Shabbos mode, the oven Shabbos mode is probably one of the most misunderstood things. First of all, they should have never called it the Shabbos mode. They should have called it the Yom Tov mode. It doesn't really it doesn't help you it helps you very little for Shabbos. It could actually help you very significantly for Shabbos, but not in the ways that it seems like it could help you. Like people seem to think that they can leave it on over Shabbos, leave food in there over Shabbos, put food in there on Shabbos, and you actually really can't do that. You can never put food into an oven on Shabbos. You can never put food into an oven on Shabbos. A lot of people get this wrong, and it's not their fault. Maybe it's you who gets it wrong. It's not your fault. I think it's the fault. I don't know how it ever happened that they called this the Shabbos mode. I think it was like such a big mistake. It's really pretty funny. You can never put food into an oven on Shabbos. The reason you can't put food into an oven on Shabbos is because it looks like you're cooking. That's it, right? Not, again, it's very important. Shabbos, anything we're talking about, it's either going to be permitted, rarely. No, I'm just kidding. Sometimes it'll be permitted. Other times it's going to be prohibited because it looks like you're cooking. And other times it's going to be prohibited because you are cooking. Since we know we can heat food up on Shabbos, certain types of food in certain ways, it's not prohibited because it's cooking. You can heat that same food up on a hot plate. But by putting it into the oven, it looks like cooking, and that's going to be a problem. So you can never put food into an oven. The one exception could be, and I don't know anyone who does this, but Rav Moshe Feinstein talked about if you had a blech inside the oven, which would, but a blech that worked in the oven. It wouldn't be a sheet. It would be a box. Like, because you have to, On the stovetop, you cover the fire like this, but in the oven, you'd have to cover it like around, you'd have to cover it around the food kind of. And I don't know anyone who has anything like that. And I think that the point of that would be, it'd be very obvious that you're not cooking because you're putting it into a box that's inside the stove. I don't recommend this, and I don't know
I
anyone.
think caterers use that, no?
A blech inside?
Yeah, because they bring in ovens that are like you just described. How do they serve hot food on Shabbos?
Oh, so the ovens that they bring in are really more like, and somebody put this in over here asking about a warming drawer. They're not really, I don't think that they're really using ovens. I think they're really using warming, these like warming, it's not a warming drawer, it's a warming oven, but you don't cook in it. Anything that you don't cook in, we're not worried that it's going to look like you're cooking. That's the thing. So that's one thing. The second thing that maybe, you could put food into a warming drawer if you don't cook in that warming drawer. And I've heard different things about different warming drawers that people have. Some people have told me, no, we cook in there. If you cook in there, then it's like an oven. So it would be the same thing for the caterer. If that food if that oven is an oven that you cook with, then it would be problematic. But if they don't cook with it, they only use it to warm, that wouldn't be. Now, remember a couple of things. First of all, you can take food out of an oven on Shabbos. So if what you're saying from the caterer is they bring these warming ovens, leave food in it overnight and take it out in the morning, that's a different story. That's number one. Number two is, it's very interesting. The star K allows a non-Jew to put food into an oven on Shabbos. And that's actually a very big leniency. Back in the day when we used to have kiddushes in our shul, we used to allow that also, because we felt we didn't have to be more lenient than the strictest kashrut agency in town. And that's actually a very, very big leniency. The OU doesn't do that. You want to hear something funny? I hope this doesn't offend anyone or make anyone upset, because it is being recorded. So did you ever notice that Hoffman, when they have like noodle kugel at a kiddush, it's not that hot? I don't know if anyone's ever noticed this. Maybe I'm the only one who noticed it. But for example, like Yafa, or when we have our kiddush, the kugel will be piping hot. That's because Hoffman is not under the star K. He's under the OU. And the OU doesn't allow a non-Jew to put food into the oven on Shabbos. So either you leave the kugel in from before Shabbos, right? Which is probably not a great idea for like Lakshin kugel. Potato kugel, that could be good. That's overnight kugel. That's like, that costs more, or you have to figure out a way to warm up, I don't know, 400 servings of Lakshin kugel without putting it into an oven, in which case it's not going to get that hot. So it's actually a very big leniency that we allow a non-Jew to put food into the oven on Shabbos, but generally we don't. But we could take the food out. So just to answer the couple of questions I see over here, Shabbos mode on an oven, or for that matter, if it wasn't a Shabbos mode oven or whatever, where you could take food out of the oven on Shabbos. You could take food out of the oven Friday night or Shabbos day. We're talking about putting food into. When you're taking the food out of the oven, there are other things that you have to be careful about. When you're taking the food out of the oven, you have to be careful that when you open the door, it doesn't adjust the temperature. And one of the things that we say is that if you're taking food out of the oven, you have to take all the food out of the oven. You can't take some food out of the oven and leave the other food in. That's because we're concerned about the temperature being adjusted. It seems even the Shabbos mode ovens, when you open the door, that is going to affect the temperature inside.
We're talking about an oven that's off.
No. I'm not talking about an oven that's off.
For Shabbos, not a Yom Tov. You put it in Shabbos mode, turn it off so the light doesn't come on. I thought you can only open that oven one time.
If the oven is off, there shouldn't be a problem opening it and taking something out and then opening it again. if the oven is
Something with
off,
creating a seal or something. I don't.
I'm not. There's a concept like that, and some people will put like a towel there, so it doesn't really create that like seal. I'm not so concerned about that. I don't think that's the bigger
The oven is
problem.
off. You cook everything. Now, earlier you said you can't leave it on the cooking surface.
Which case? Sorry.
Did you say like if you
I was looking
cook
at the-
soup, let's say you shouldn't leave it on the surface you cooked it on, right? For fear
if
that
it's
you would-
on.
What's that?
If it's on. If it's on.
If it's off, it's fine.
If it's off, it's fine. Yeah. If you cooked soup, shut off the fire before Shabbos, and left it on the burner that was there that was off, I don't see it. I don't see any problem. It's not the oven's. It's the stove's not on. I mean, it's not on. I don't think there's a problem with that. I could be wrong. If you hear, if you heard something differently,
I thought that was something you showed earlier.
No, it shouldn't be as long as it's off. As long as it's off, it shouldn't be a problem. If you have, I'm not concerned. The concern about opening the oven and then closing the oven again is when the oven is on. And even on the Shabbos mode, and this is like, I think this is a myth, that on the Shabbos mode, the temperature doesn't change. I don't think that's true. The temperature does change. What happens is when you open it and it lets in cold air, it's going to kick on the fan or with thermostat or whatever it is, right? That's why you have to take everything out. Because if you take everything out and it kicks it on, it's called something, it's a psik resha, it's something that happens to lo nichale that you don't care about. I didn't care. I didn't want the temperature to go on. I don't care. I'm finished with it. But if you leave food in there and it kicks it on so the food stays warmer, that's a problem. And that would be the case even with the Shabbos mode, oven. Here's another question.
I talked to somebody, Rabbi Posner, once about the Shabbos oven, and he said basically he felt the Shabbos oven that it overrode the 12-hour shutoff that's in a standard oven. And
yeah, that's another thing that they say. By the way, Brian, we can't see you, but it's good to hear you. If we can't see you on purpose, that's fine. But I'm just telling you.
Oops. Sorry.
There we go. Nice to see. It's great to see you. It's been forever.
Good to see you too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another advantage that those Shabbos mode ovens have is that apparently most ovens will automatically shut off after 12 hours, but the Shabbos mode oven will override that. So you can leave something in until the next morning. Doesn't matter the amount. I'm just reading from the chat. Doesn't matter the amount. The food is cooked half or a third when leaving in oven that is on and taking out during Shabbat. That would be the person who asked. Lauren put this question in. Does it matter the amount the food is cooked, a half or a third cooked, when leaving in oven that is?
Sorry, it's just noise in the background. All I'm asking is, you were saying that the amount that it's cooked, you're saying that you can take it out of the oven if it's still cooking, going into Shabbos, right? You can take it out of the oven. Does it matter the amount that it's cooked going into Shabbos? Like, does it have to be at least a half cooked to let it stay in the oven to continue cooking, to take it out that one time once?
Yes, that would be the same distinction as the other cases that we were talking about.
It has to be fully cooked, you mean?
Where you would want it to either be fully cooked or half cooked, or fully cooked raw or half or a third cooked, because we would have a concern potentially about adjusting a temperature, because that concern would still be there, since you could adjust the temperature, and you would do that for something that was in an oven. Like if something, wasn't cooked enough, you would still have that concern. So yeah, that does apply.
I have another question.
Yeah.
If you have an oven that's not on Shabbos mode, or don't have a Shabbos oven, and you want to leave something in there with the light off, don't you have to make sure that with the temperature off, don't you have to make sure that the light doesn't go on when you open the oven?
Yeah, correct. That's actually one of the most significant advantages to the Shabbos mode oven. Yeah, when you open the door, you can't have the light go on. If the light goes on, then it's a problem. So you'd have to figure out a way to disable the light and then leave it off. If you could do that, that's fine. You could, even in a non-Shabbos mode oven, if the light is off, you could even have something be like on warm and then take it out and all the food out and close the door. It shouldn't be a problem either. It shouldn't be any different than the Shabbos mode oven. The only difference with the Shabbos mode is that the oven would be off. The only thing is then you would have your oven on warm the whole Shabbos. So you may not want to do that. Yeah, exactly. It's like a refrigerator we're taking out the bulb before Shabbat. The problem is that it seems that the types of ovens that are being made these days, and even the fridges, I think, are really, it's much more difficult to like disable to like take a light bulb out. And that's why the Shabbos mode ovens become even more important. The Shabbos mode ovens for Yom Tov definitely have a real advantage. So, all right, I want to sort of keep to our time. So we'll stop here for today. Today, what we talked about some general principles about cooking, talked about some general principles about cooking on Shabbat, and we really focused on shehiyah, which is placing something before Shabbat. Next week, we're going to talk about chazara, which means returning something to a fire once you've taken it off. And there's important ramifications for that. And the week after, we're going to talk about putting something on that, basically taking something out of the fridge and putting it on. So all of these are sort of like different elements. There's a lot of pieces that connect in all of them, but they're specific cases. So I hope that you found today helpful. I hope that it was. And if you have any more questions or anything that you want to specifically address in coming weeks, feel free to contact me. Just send me an email and put the question in there. And if you want the source sheet that we use, feel free to email me and I will return it to you. So we'll be back next week at the same time, same place. Nice to see all of you. Enjoy. All the best.
Thank you.
Take care.
At the end of the 3 weeks, will you be sending out like a summary?
It's in this. It's the source sheet. So I'm happy to just email me and I'll send that to you.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay,
Thank you. Stay well. See you.
bye everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.